We go. All right. So here is everything you ever wanted to know about TMS. Probably a bunch of stuff that you don't need to know as well. Um, so let me start by saying what TMS is not. So it's actually not at all the same as shock therapy or electroconvulsive therapy, which sometimes patients, I mean, not a lot of people are familiar with it, and a lot of people actually are familiar with shock therapy and the social, um, I mean, I guess from like the movie in the 70s, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and stuff, um, it's just like crazy, like evil, like psychiatric procedure that can be done. And it's actually not as bad as it's portrayed in the media, and it still happens in the hospital in cases of sort of a last resort, and it actually works a fair amount of the time. But TMS is a much newer procedure. It's totally non-invasive. It doesn't apply electricity to the patient like ECT does. Um, you actually just apply magnetic fields to the brain. Um, and so the device, the TMS device, I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures of what those devices look like. But they all have an electromagnetic coil, and then you can position that on the patient's head and essentially shoot magnetic fields into the brain. Um, and so it's the only, I mean, it's like a focal targeted treatment, targeting the spot where we think the depression is coming from. Although I shouldn't say spot, because really the latest thinking is that there's like a bunch of different parts of the brain that are kind of involved in regulating somebody's mood, and they're networked together. So like different parts of the brain are networked together in a circuit, and we can reach or access with the TMS coil, we can access like one piece of the network. And by delivering magnetic fields to that spot, we can like change the behavior, change the electrical activity that's going on in that part of the brain. But that will be sort of translated around the whole circuit, or this, the mood, the circuit of the brain that's kind of controlling mood, um, will all get the effects of the TMS in sort of a domino effect kind of fashion. Um, that's our best understanding now. We'll see how that stands up to the test of time. Um, in any case, most treatments that we do with TMS, and I've got a slide on the different treatments we can do, but it takes repeated sessions of TMS for these protocols to work on the patient. So they're going to be coming into the office usually 5 days a week until they've had 36 treatments, or in some cases 50 treatments, depending on the protocol that we're using. And there's two different major types of TMS coil. Most of the devices have the figure 8 coil, and then there's a device that has something called an H coil, and I'll show you pictures of that now. So these are, there might be another one. This picture is a little bit old and showing 7 devices. And these are the ones I'm most familiar with. I don't know if there's another one that got approved yet or not, um, but I have the two that are on the top in the middle, like the MagVenture device and the Cloud TMS device. I've got both of those. So the coil you can see kind of like hovering over the chair in this MagVenture device. And then on the Cloud device, it's this white thing that's kind of sticking up at the top of the device. That's the coil. And this one on the bottom left, the BrainsWay device, the coil is built into essentially what are helmets that are literally like strapped on to the patient, like a helmet using like a chin strap. Um, that's the one that has that different kind of coil shape. The other coils are not really, the most TMS coils are not shaped the right way to kind of be designed into a helmet like that. And they're usually positioned like off to the side on the patient as well. So like the helmet doesn't lend itself well to that. So there they are. Now, what is it approved for? So it's got all these approvals now. The first approval for TMS was treatment-resistant major depressive disorder in adults. All the devices are approved for that. They all get these FDA approvals based on like this copycat method. That's super common for getting stuff FDA approved, including all kind of medical devices like hip implants and stuff. They don't actually do like a study anymore to show that like the latest like titanium hip is like really a good hip. They just say it's pretty much the same as the one that you approved back in like 1960 or whatever. So and then the FDA is like, yeah, it looks pretty close, so we'll go ahead and approve it. And that's the same thing they do with TMS. So like one device company, the NeuroStar company, did a big study and got the original TMS approval. And now like these other devices get approved saying our device is basically the same as the NeuroStar. So they get these add-on approvals. It happened again. When did let me see, I forget exactly when OCD got approved. It was probably, it was after 2018 though. I think OCD probably got approved in like 2020-ish, maybe a little earlier than that. And so the same thing's happening. And that was the helmet device company, which is kind of funny. That device wasn't as popular, and but they were smart and they showed that their TMS coil was effective at treating OCD. And since then, like three other of the device companies have gotten their copycat OCD approvals, including the two devices that I have. Um, there's one TMS device that I've never seen that's approved for migraines with Aura, which is really interesting. And I don't know why it seems to not be really in use. It's a home device that would be prescribed to somebody by a neurologist to a patient with migraines, and then they would, when they get their migraine, they would like put the device on the back of their head and it would deliver one single magnetic pulse to the back of their head, and that's it. And something like half the time or more, that would actually stop the migraine in its tracks. Sounds really cool. So I don't know what's going on with that. I've never met a person that ever told me they've used that device. The funny looking helmet device got also an approval for smoking cessation. It's the only one, as far as I know, that got that approval. It's not available locally. Like there was a company called MindPath that had that device like in Mayfair, and that office like imploded, and they moved the device to their Durham office, and I think they shut down completely. But that office anyway. But as far as I know, none of the other practices in town. I don't know what everybody there's a couple of newer practices that are doing TMS, and I'm not exactly sure what they have, but I don't, as far as I know, think any of them have the helmet device or do the smoking cessation treatment. But the data wasn't that great on that one anyway. In the study, like 27% of the patients had quit smoking, and 17% of like the control group had quit. So it's like 10% better, but still the numbers were low. But it was really interesting to see them go for something in the addiction space, because it would be nice to get more treatments available for addictions, that you could do with a non-invasive treatment like this. Anxious depression has been approved by a couple of the device companies. That one was kind of interesting because it's like, what's the difference? I mean, if you have patients with severe treatment-resistant depression, in all likelihood, like 8 or 9 out of 10 of those people are telling you they have a lot of anxiety too, and that's, I guess, you want to call it anxious depression, that's fine. So it works. It works for that, I would think, just as well as for people without any anxiety, um, but it doesn't always work for both. I mean, I've seen examples where like somebody has both and then their depression got better, but the anxiety is still there. And I've seen other cases where they both got better. Like they seem like the depression and anxiety were more linked, and so they kind of both went away at the same time. And of course, there's always people that don't get better, that don't respond. So it's certainly not um, not guaranteed to work. Adolescent depression got approved recently, so that was big news, right? We haven't been able to treat, or it's been difficult to treat anybody under the age of 18 with TMS. I mean, I've had maybe one that was 17 who had a kind of insurance that like didn't care and covered it anyway, but most insurances would just deny that. And still, even now that it's approved, I mean, it's just approved 2 months ago, and insurance companies are not just going to like instantaneously say, okay, we'll pay for it now. Like it'll probably be like a fight with every insurance company one by one over the next several years to get them to cover it in kids. But I mean, now that it's FDA approved, it's hard for them to argue against it. And so like it could probably be more successfully appealed to the insurance companies that want to deny it. So that's cool. And of course, that was just one of the device companies that got that approval, but as is the typical pattern, the other device companies will get copycat approvals over the coming years to mirror that. And then this is a list of stuff they're working on. You can see like 3 out of 4 of those are pain conditions. So like neuropathic pain, post-stroke pain, and fibromyalgia. That would be super, super awesome to have a kind of like non-invasive procedure that you could do for pain instead of like meds and injections and things like that. And the data is, I guess the data is evolving. I mean, I saw like enough data on fibromyalgia, and I had a patient that was depressed and had fibromyalgia, which is pretty common to have both. Like if you have severe chronic pain and you've had it for years and stuff, like you're probably also depressed. So she was a good candidate, and I did treat, and she told me that her fibromyalgia was better at the end of it. So I'm really interested in seeing where that goes, because if they can get it approved, FDA approved, then we'll really find out like how well it works, like once it's in like clinical use for that kind of diagnosis. But PTSD would also be super amazing because the FDA recently shot down the MDMA trials that they were reviewing and decided not to approve that. And so we still basically don't have good medication options. Like all the meds that we have for PTSD are super mediocre and not real impressive. And I don't know if it'll pan out or not with TMS for PTSD, but certainly they're looking at that very carefully to see, can we make that work well enough, for it to be an approved option for those patients. So this is the slide about what does it take to get this kind of treatment covered for a patient. Major depressive disorder is the one that's pretty much universally covered by insurances that do cover it. The only one I know of that people can have here that won't cover it at all would be Medicaid. But Medicare covers it, commercial insurance covers it. The criteria vary slightly, but it's if they have a severe major depressive episode, can be a single episode situation, or this can be like the latest of a series of depressive episodes they've had over their life. And the severity, I would measure it if they see me for like a consultation. I use a PHQ-9. There's other like questionnaire-based kind of depression rating scales that you could use. PHQ-9 is just like a free and quick and easy one that I use. And so on that, I don't know if you're familiar with PHQ-9, like a score of over 15 or over 20 would be good enough, depending on which insurance they have. Like if it's Blue Cross, they're real picky and they want it to be 20. Like so they want the patient to be bad enough almost to be in the hospital, which is crazy, before they want to approve it. But with Medicare, if they have like a 15 or higher, I would approve them for it. And then they have to have tried 2 antidepressants for Medicare and for United. For Blue Cross, they have to have tried 4 antidepressants. So it's a pattern. Blue Cross is like the most picky for some reason still. They're kind of behind the times on their criteria. But a lot of people have taken 4 or 10 or 15, antidepressants over the years. So I get quite a lot of people actually through that criteria process with Blue Cross. And then they have to have tried adequate, evidence-based psychotherapy. An adequate trial, I mean, the literature would agree that 12 sessions of CBT or 12 sessions of interpersonal therapy would be like a legit adequate trial of therapy. And that is required by any insurance company that's looking at this. Um, OCD, so like I said, OCD only Medicare locally is covering separate OCD criteria for this. Like in other parts of the country, there's other plans that cover it. Um, if if a patient has both, so if they have like severe OCD and severe depression, I can just get it approved using the depression criteria because the treatment for OCD is deep TMS, and deep TMS works for both depression and OCD, both at the same time. So it's basically like a two birds with one stone type situation where the treatment is going to work for both anyway. So if I get it approved based on the depression criteria, that's fine. That's good enough. And I can then treat both. But if they had Medicare, this would be the criteria. So they have to have tried 2 antidepressants and not gotten better. And they had to have severe OCD. And but Medicare had this other thing, like if the person is on what they call like a risky med for their OCD, including antipsychotics, benzos, opiates, or memantine, then that would be a good enough reason. So I think in lieu of trying 2 antidepressants, if for some reason they only tried one, but now they're on like Abilify or Risperdal or something, then you can go ahead, or Xanax, then you can go ahead with the TMS. And they also need to have had adequate evidence-based psychotherapy of CBT or exposure response prevention. So this is a slide about TMS versus antidepressant meds. So TMS is focal. So I'm looking at the points on the right side, and the top one, is giving a rundown of stuff that happens with meds that are not focal, right? Those are like systemic treatments. So they take the meds, it goes into their bloodstream, it goes through their whole body. The like 90% of the serotonin receptors are in the GI tract. So the most common side effects from antidepressants, especially Zoloft, is GI distress. And then sexual side effects are very common, sometimes severe. And then, some patients have weight gain from antidepressants. I mean, it's not super common, but I've seen it happen. So there's a bunch of stuff like that that can happen with meds that does not happen at all with TMS. TMS isn't going into the body, it's just, targeting the brain directly, which is where the depression lives, in the brain. So that's kind of a nice advantage of TMS. It doesn't have cognitive side effects, so that point is specifically to differentiate TMS from ECT or shock therapy, which has caused memory loss in a lot of patients. TMS doesn't do that. It's non-invasive, so there's no downtime, no anesthesia or anything like that. And it's effective in patients with treatment-resistant depression. So, and then this point about medication having diminishing returns is sort of illustrated by the big famous STAR-D trial, which is getting kind of old now, but it was like a big, massive undertaking where they gave an antidepressant to like treatment-naive patients and found that maybe like 27 or 28% of them got better. And then the ones that didn't get better, they gave them like a second antidepressant, and then maybe 20% of those got better. And then they gave a third antidepressant to the rest, and 16%. And then you can see like it goes down to 6 or 7%, right? I mean, really, after they've only taken like 3 different antidepressant meds, now the likelihood of like medication number 4 working is super, super low. And TMS is effective in that population. So that's a big differentiator between TMS and meds. And it is arguable, like how many meds should they try first? I think like Blue Cross's opinion on that is not like the norm. You'd think 2 meds is probably enough. Arguably, one medication is enough. I mean, there's some kind of treatment guideline in Florida that says, one medication should be enough, and if they didn't get better. And you can even imagine like a time in the future where the patient is allowed to choose, like if they're not a fan of meds, for whatever reason, or maybe they have family members that had bad experiences with meds and they'd really not rather take them. This could be like a first line option for treatment, but as it is with the coverage environment, it's like second line, so they have to have tried the meds and the therapy first. So let's look at how successful it is. This is one data set from Linda Carpenter at Brown, and her data, and I've 2012 she published this, so it's a little bit old. And in her data set, it looked like more than half of the patients were responding, and then about 1 in 3 patients were going into remission. And depression in remission, a PHQ-9 score of less than 5 is considered remission. And so that's amazing to have some patients having their depression go into remission. Now, I'll say here that it doesn't cure. I mean, there's like no real cure, lifetime cure for depression, and it's gonna, in all likelihood, come back at some point. And the length of somebody's remission is highly variable from person to person, and it's really not something that we can predict. That some people could go into remission for just a few months, and other people can be in remission for years. And I've seen patients with severe depressive episodes that they had to be hospitalized for, that went on to have remissions with like 7 years after that. So it's possible, to have good long-term remission with this. And it's also possible to have a brief remission and then have to figure out what to do the next episode they have. They can get TMS again. They could try other medication options. They could try the new ketamine treatment, or maybe in a couple of years they'll be able to try psilocybin or something. But yeah, that's the goal, is remission. But if you look at larger data sets, so Linda's study had like 300 patients in it. There's large data sets now, because the Neurostar company, which was the first TMS device approved, has been collecting data since 2008, I guess. And so they've got like millions of treatments logged, and they're saying in their data that, up to like 70% of patients are actually responding. In my practice, I think that's right. I think about 2/3 of the patients have a positive response to it, and about 1/3 go into remission. So side effects for TMS. So it's not bad. It does feel weird. So the discomfort, like at the location that the TMS is being applied, like right where the magnetic fields are going through the skin, feels a little prickly and kind of a little electric-y. Patients do get used to it, or kind of build up like a tolerance to the sensation. It's generally not bad enough for them to drop out. I did have like one patient drop out one time. Um, and I've had, in my practice, I started doing TMS here in 2018, and I've had like about 275 people get TMS now. You can get a headache from it. It's not super common though, and if they do, it's like a mild headache that they can take Tylenol or Advil for. Um, During the treatment, there can be some like referred pain to like the jaw or the eye, but usually we can like adjust the positioning to make them comfortable. Insomnia and anxiety are possible, but not real common. It's maybe like 3 to 5% of patients that have had that reaction to it. So all in all, pretty good on the side effects, pretty decent side effect profile compared to medication options. The only contraindication, the only absolute contraindication is metal in the head. So, which is not common. I mean, I guess you could have somebody that had like a veteran that had like been exposed to some kind of shrapnel or something that had embedded metals. Surgical stuff usually doesn't leave a ferromagnetic metal inside. I think they usually use like titanium or something that's not going to react to magnetic fields so that the patient can still get an MRI scan. Anybody that can get a brain MRI can have TMS. There are a couple examples though, of things that would preclude the treatment. So cochlear implants for the deaf are, that's a deal breaker. You can't do it. And then there's a new device. I hope it doesn't become real common, but it's for sleep apnea. It's like this new device called, I think, Inspire or something. And there is like a control box in the patient's chest, kind of like a pacemaker that they put in. And then there's a wire that like runs up their neck and like under their chin. And it's like a wire implanted there. And so that um, can't get TMS if you have that thing. And it's supposed to like move your tongue instead of having to wear like a CPAP mask. You can use this. Not real common yet, and I hope it doesn't become common, but
Well,
dental work. Oh, go ahead.
I was just curious, what was the name of that device called? Because that sounds absolutely wild.
Yeah, it's wild. I think it was the Inspire.
Sure.
Let me just Google it real quick and just check on that. But I called them when I first heard of it. A patient came in. Yeah, Inspire sleep apnea comes right up. Um, Yeah, somebody with sleep apnea told me I don't think they had it, but they were like thinking about getting it. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Let me let me call, or I tried to look up what I could online and I couldn't really satisfy my question about it. So I called the company and they were like, yeah, they talked to their like, engineers or scientists or whatever. And we're like, yep, you can't do it. You can't do it. It's even like they have one where you can get an MRI, but you can't just get a regular MRI. There's like some kind of hoops that have to be jumped through for the patient to have an MRI after they have that thing. And only the newer model is able to be sort of MRI safe, but then like the radiologists have to do something special with the MRI in order to make it safe. It's weird. Um, but dental work is okay. Actually, we just got a question from somebody about braces. Braces are okay. Fillings and stuff, tattoos are fine. All right. So that this is stuff that you probably don't need to know. Really, it's not going to be on the test. Just kidding about the test. But it came out, it's just interesting. Like it came out in 2008 after being studied since probably 1985, like in little research studies. It was invented by an engineer in the UK named Tony Barker. The original protocol took almost 40 minutes. That was the one that was originally approved in 2008. And then mainly because of like engineering advancements and the way they made these devices with cooling systems and stuff, in 2017, they halved the time that you needed to do the protocol because it now they had it so that it wouldn't overheat the machine. Back in '08, if you tried to do all the pulses and 3,000 pulses in 19 minutes, it would like overheat the device. So that got better. Then they came out with a new protocol, like basically a different pattern of stimulation. And then that one could be done in 3 minutes. And the 3 minutes of that was proven to be just as good as the 19-minute protocol. So that was pretty cool. And then a couple years ago, the Saint protocol came out. So Saint protocol, as far as I know, not available locally. There are some places in the country where you can get it. It was designed to be an accelerated TMS protocol where you could do all the treatments in 1 week's time. And to do that, you had to do 10 treatments per day. And so that was really meant for patients that were in the hospital, especially like if they're in the emergency room and they're suicidally depressed, but it's going to take us like a week to find them a psych bed. And so they're just sitting there wasting their time in the ER for several days anyway. Why not give them like 10 TMS treatments every day? And by like day 5, they're already either starting to feel better. And some of the patients in those studies started to feel better actually during that week, which is shocking. And then others had more of like a delayed effect where they didn't feel better that week, but then like a couple weeks later, they were like, oh my God, I'm totally better now. Um, so either way, it's a good treatment and it does require a couple of MRIs. And I think um, that's going to be an issue. I'm going to try to talk the hospital into getting it one of these days, but they, they're going to need to be able to get MRIs in a timely fashion, which right now they cannot. And also there needs to be billing codes because right now you can only bill for one treatment a day. So they'll need to be able to bill for 10 treatments a day in order to make it like viable, for the hospital to do that. So if you wanted that accelerated protocol, and it got a lot of news, like a lot of press coverage and stuff, and so patients would call up and ask, like, what about that one that they did at Stanford, And I'm like, oh, I know what you mean. But if you want that treatment, it's out of pocket, and you could go to one of the centers in California, or um, where was the one? Somebody told me the other day he came in, he said there was one at some academic hospital in the South, somewhere, Alabama or something, had one program for that. And they're pitching it on their website like a retreat, like you pay for like a 7-day retreat and get the same protocol while you're there. It's like a vacation package. But anyway, it is actually a good treatment protocol. I hope it eventually like becomes more like available to people with insurance. All right, so still off label. I used to have adolescent depression on this slide. I was so happy I got to take that off this slide because we finally got it after all these years. But bipolar depression is still not approved. It's really, really frustrating because the FDA said it was going to be on a fast track in 2020. So it's actually been 4 years since they teased us with that one. There's not, in my view, there's really not a lot of good treatment options for bipolar depression. And it's also not entirely clear like why bipolar depression is different from regular major depression, because the depressive episodes look pretty much the same. And one patient has had a manic episode in the past and the other one has not. So what's the big deal? But the antidepressants don't work according to the data. I mean, you try, you end up trying those patients on antidepressants anyway, because it's like you got to do something. But um, in general, the data for antidepressants in bipolar patients is not good, and it does not look like they work. There are drugs that are approved for bipolar depression, namely Seroquel and Latuda, which are antipsychotics, and of course, have loads of heavy duty side effects. Lamictal was approved and looked like it was somewhat helpful. That's an anticonvulsant that's pretty well tolerated, but it is a pain in the neck to use and it can cause a life-threatening rash. And I'm not super excited about Lamictal. but I've had patients that benefited from it, and I don't, I do use it when I need to, but it'd be so cool to have TMS for this. And so far, what's happened is like a lot of small studies, and all of them but one were negative studies. They all looked like the TMS was no better than like placebo or like sham fake TMS. And so there's still work to be done. There's a possibility that different locations of treatment or different parameters that the device are set for would work better for bipolar depression, and that has yet to be worked out. So they need to optimize the protocol and do a bigger study, and hopefully they'll figure out, how to make this work for bipolar depression. So it's off label. You could do it. I have had patients with bipolar depression and that have gotten better with TMS, but it's not covered. And then as always with anything with bipolar, antidepressant treatments of all kinds, including meds, TMS, or ECT, can induce manic episodes. So you have to be careful, and patients have to take like mood stabilizers to protect against mania. Because bad manias end up in the hospital, so you don't want that. Um, so that's my wish list. Get it approved for bipolar, that'd be awesome. Um, so that's pretty much the whole thing. I mean, it's non-invasive, it's focal, it's been in clinical use almost 20 years. It's very safe and well tolerated. FDA approved for some treatment-resistant, difficult to treat conditions. And so I'm gonna open it up for questions. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I got a few questions. One, I just really appreciate how passionate you are about this. You could really tell, like, this is absolutely your jam, and I love
Yes.
that. Love that so much. Um,
Thanks.
how long have you been practicing with TMS?
So since 2018, it got approved when I was just graduating medical school and I didn't know anything about it. So I was graduating in like '09 and it got approved in 2008. And so I did my psych residency at Wake Forest from 2009 to 2013. And there was one singular mention of TMS the entire 4 years that I was at Wake doing psychiatry training. And it was Wake had like a really robust ECT program. I spent 3 months with the doctors that did ECT, and one of the ECT docs, gave us a lecture one day and said TMS, was a treatment option, but that the jury was still out. And they really weren't sure if TMS was effective, and he kind of doubted it. And that was all that was said. And so I graduated and went on to practice, and eventually kind of got frustrated like with not having more treatment options. I mean, I had medications at my disposal. I had, I could refer patients for therapy or for ECT treatments, in cases where um, the meds weren't working. And ECT is a really tough sell. Patients are scared of it with good reason. And it does have memory loss as a side effect. And some people have very publicly, like, said that they wish they never got it, even though a lot of people that really, really benefited from it are not super public about how much of a life-changing, savior it was for them. So it has a bad rap, and I wanted something else. And I was talking to a friend who I went to residency with, and he had done like a fellowship after psych residency in it was called behavioral neurology or neuropsychiatry, and he went to San Diego to do that at UC San Diego. He was doing TMS, which is much more like at the time, much more common in California because they're like that. I don't know. It's like the state is like um seems super willing to adopt like new treatments that aren't super well established or proven yet, kind of the same thing happened with like the ketamine treatments out there too. And so there was tons of TMS clinics, and he got into it. And I was talking to him one day, and I was like, yeah, man, I really wish I had some other option. And he was like, it's covered by insurance. I was like, what? So it's FDA approved and covered by insurance? Like, I had no clue from my training that that was the case. And this was like it must have been 2018 when we had that conversation, because I was like, immediately, I was like, okay, I gotta do this, So I like signed up for a conference in New York. They had like a TMS conference, and I went and like did like a training class on it, and like looked at all the devices and talked to the people that were doing it and stuff. And I started, and there was one guy in Wilmington that had been doing TMS since 2009. It was Paul Bongiorno. And Bongiorno got what at the time was the only TMS device on the market. It was the NeuroStar, a super expensive device to own and operate. They charge you like usage fees every time you do a treatment with it. It's like even though you like paid, I don't know what he paid. I mean, probably like $100,000 for that machine, and then they want to charge him like 75 bucks every time he uses it to treat a patient. And of course back then there was no insurance coverage for TMS, even though it was FDA approved. It took a few years like to get the insurance companies to get around to covering it. And so cash only was the only option. So he was an early adopter, and he got the device, and it was $12,000 to get treatments from him, and he was still doing it. And then I was like the second person in town, and this was 2018, like 9 years later. And so I got other devices that weren't the Neuros, or I started out with just one. of course, the cloud TMS device, which was way cheaper and didn't have usage fees. And I was taking insurance, and I was taking all these insurances. And so we really didn't have, I don't think we had like a ton of competition with each other because, people that wanted to pay could just keep going to see him. Um, so 2018, so it's been like 6 years now. And like I said, it's been almost 300 patients, like, coming up on 300 patients that I've had get the treatment. And so I've seen what it does, like, from working with these patients and seeing the difference, like in their whole demeanor. Like when somebody's depression goes into remission, you meet them again, like for the first time, like their personality and stuff. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's like a totally different person.
Yeah, PHQ 9 of 5, like,
Yeah. Even sometimes zero. I've seen patient where it goes down to 0 or 1, and it started out at like 20, 25, 27 sometimes
that's so
maximum
wild.
scores. It doesn't always, and it's the only thing is like when it doesn't work, it's frustrating, it's disappointing, nothing really bad happens. I mean, it's, they no harm is come from like an unsuccessful round of TMS, and I try to talk them through like what are the next steps, like other treatment options that they can pursue at that
Mhm.
point if TMS didn't work. But it's a disappointment when it doesn't, but when it does, it's like awesome. And then there's like that group of patients where it like kind of worked, like they're like, yeah, I do feel different. Like I feel a little better. Like the depression's like not really gone, but it's not as bad, So I guess that's a win too. And like a lot of patients, when I tell them that's like a possible outcome, they're like, I'll take that. Even if that happens, like I'll take it, like because depression's so bad now. And like I don't even want to leave the house.
Yeah,
And they have to
every
commit. Like if I'm telling them like you got to come in here like 5 days a week, it's a commitment. It's like a struggle sometimes for them, but I mean, they love my staff, I have technicians that sit in there with them and like talk to them, and it gets to be like, a social engagement for them as well as a treatment. So
that's awesome.
yeah,
Yeah, 2 more questions, if that's
yeah,
okay.
as many as you
Um,
want. Yeah.
you know, just off the top of your head, how much these, like, saint retreats are? I'm so curious.
I think that they would probably charge around $20,000 for that. And I know there was a place in Florida that was advertising it early on. I have a friend. I should ask Mohammed. My buddy that I went to residency with that's practicing in California now has a clinic in La Jolla, and I don't
Yeah,
know what he charges. He can do the protocol though. I should ask him. But
yeah, just
there's
so
other
curious.
countries. Like I know somebody from Brazil. I mean, his sister got the same protocol in um, whatever the biggest city is in Brazil. I forget the name of it.
Yeah,
It's available around the world for cash for sure. And
mm,
I think I think for 20, you might be able to get it for less than 20. But I think when I originally saw it was being done, the place I saw was asking 20.
yeah.
It's a
Nice,
lot. It's,
nice.
yeah, I mean, if you had a lot of money and like you could take a week off and do it. I mean, I can understand the thought behind like
Totally.
it's hard for somebody maybe to spread out the treatments over 7 or 8 or 9 weeks, but
Mhm.
if they could get them all done in 1 week and just take a week off, maybe they could do it. But then I find really a lot of my patients are either not working because their depression is like
Mm,
disabled them to the point where they can't work,
totally.
or they're Medicare patients that are retired anyway. And so for them, it's no big deal to come into the office, or they're on, Medicare or a Medicare type thing like Humana,
Mhm.
all of which I take. Those are kind of bread and butter because it is a lot easier to talk one of them into coming in every day than
Yeah.
somebody that's like working and just like has a family and stuff and they're super busy. But the treatment, they can still do it. I mean, the treatment is 15 minutes. I mean, we can get them in and out of the office in 15 minutes. They can do it on their way to work. They could do it on their lunch hour. I've had
That's
nurses I've had nurses come over from the hospital on their lunch break, and then go back to work. So it's
that's really
doable.
it. Yeah. And then my last question, and you did kind of tap into this, is what kind of impacted you to choose the 2 devices that you have at your office?
So the cloud TMS device was the first one I got, and it was the cheapest TMS device. It was like 50 grand. And it's not super cheap anyway, but for a treatment I wasn't sure about, and I was kind of getting into at the time, I was like, let me go with the lowest cost option and see how it goes. And I love that device. I've been so happy with it. It's a workhorse. It's basically a knockoff of the MagVenture device. And I don't know who it was, probably I think it was the Russians, like reverse engineered MagVenture's device, like bought one and like took it apart. And we're like, oh, we can make one of these like half this, for half the price, like started cranking out that device. And I'll tell you what, man, it works. It worked on like my very first patient. I mean, went into a complete remission, and he'd
That's
had 35 ECT treatments before he came to see me, and even ECT was starting to be like less effective for him. And so he came in to try this, and his depression went into complete remission.
yeah, and
Um,
less side effects.
yeah, less side. I mean, he literally had no side effects. It was awesome. And so yeah, I think it was the simplest, most basic device. It didn't have a lot of frills that I didn't need, and it was cheaper. And it's turned out to be an amazing device. And then later on, like when I was getting pretty busy with the one device, and I was like, there's times when I might from a scheduling standpoint, need to do like 2 treatments at the same time and have 2 rooms going at once. And so
Mhm.
it seemed like the time to go ahead and buy a second device. And I got that MagVenture device because it had a coil that was approved for OCD treatment. And then
Mm,
at the time, the only other device was the original one that got approved for OCD, the helmet device was, I call it the helmet device. It's the Brain's Way. But I didn't like the Brain's Way. The Brain's Way, because of its like helmet design and the way the stimulation happens, it's a little more headachy. It's a little more likely to cause the one serious side effect that could ever happen from TMS, which is a seizure, which I always talk to every patient about this tiny risk. It's like 1 in 30,000 patients that it can happen. And generally not like a catastrophic event. I mean, it's not good, but they walk away from it and live to tell the tale with maybe like a bite on their tongue. It's kind of nasty, um, but it doesn't it's not like that the patient somehow, acquires a seizure disorder like epilepsy or something. This is like where they were getting the treatment like irritated their brain, and they had this like one-time seizure. My buddy that's a neurologist that I went to med school with says that um, he wouldn't treat that or, put any restriction on their license from that. And what would make that happen in the small number of cases where that has happened, there's things that can make it more likely. So if the person didn't sleep at all, so they're in like a sleep deprived state, it makes seizures more likely under any circumstances. I mean, a hit to the head, like a traumatic brain injury or concussion can cause it. If they were on certain kind of meds that lower the seizure threshold, so stimulants and Wellbutrin for
mhm.
sure. If they were in a state of alcohol or benzodiazepine withdrawal, then they're already like at a higher risk of seizures from DTs, and so doing TMS in that condition would be good. So if they stayed up late or didn't sleep and they were up late drinking, we would tell them like, go home. We're gonna skip the treatment today. Don't do that again. Like we'll come back and do it the next day. So far we've never had a seizure in the office, and I'm like knocking on wood right now.
Yep, I'm with
But
you.
my colleagues have done thousands and thousands of treatments. It happened, and
Yeah.
um, and so I always had to counsel everybody about that. But that's the one thing. So that BrainsWay device, the helmet device,
Mhm.
is a little more likely to cause a seizure. So I didn't like that about it either. So I didn't want to go with that one. So when I was picking a device, and I thought, well, I want one that treats OCD, and then I don't want the helmet device. So then that's why I got the MagVenture. It was the only other option at the time. Since then, the cloud device that was the first one I had is now also approved for OCD. You just had to buy a different coil for it to do the OCD treatment. And so far, I don't need that because OCD is not that common. Like real, like severe, legit OCD. You know, everybody says that they have OCD and they're like a perfectionist or whatever, and they like arrange things on their dresser or their nightstand or whatever. But for to see like severe crippling OCD is actually pretty uncommon. Even in my patients, which tend to have more severe psychiatric issues, you know, than what most people would see, um, it's probably like less than 1% of my patients. So I'm not doing a ton of OCD treatments, but I've done some, and I wanted to be able to do it, and I'm glad I got that device, you know, to be able to do that. And what I've seen with those patients is that like the OCD gets some better. Like I've never seen OCD go into remission from well, I've seen like milder cases of OCD go into remission from meds, like from Prozac, you know, and if it's not a real severe case, it can. But if it's treatment resistant OCD,
Yeah,
which means by definition, the meds are not putting it in remission. And then you're going to do TMS for that. A reasonable expectation is that the severity of the OCD goes down by like a third. And so then they're having the like the intrusive thoughts, but they're like able to kind of like reason through it and say, okay, I know
uh,
that's the OCD, but I don't have to pay attention to that and I don't have to act on that, you know?
that's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I really
you're welcome.
appreciate your answers, and I yield my time.
All right. Well, I'm gonna stop the recording before this thing gets super big, and then I'll see how I get this uploaded and send you guys a link.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time and for your knowledge and just your passion towards this. I really appreciate learning about this. That was great.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
cheers. Very cool.
And you know,
Um,
you can go to my website, centerforbrainstimulation.com, and there's like referral forms on there that you can fill out. The patient can fill out a form on there. They can call us. I have somebody like a dedicated TMS coordinator that gets back to everyone.
Yeah, and would that be, going through the website and doing a referral that way, your preferred
Hmm.
method referral?
Yeah, that's probably the easiest way. I mean, you can always fax a referral too if you want, and all my info's on that website. Um, but yeah, the patients that call are usually the ones that are most motivated to actually follow through and like, you know, come in for the consultation and get the treatment. A lot of the like just website only inquiries we get like from patients, it's amazing that half of them like never answer their
Mm,
phone. They won't respond. Like we'll reach out and say, "Hey, you submitted this on our website. You know, want to talk about it?" And
yeah,
yeah, but but yeah, if you're sending a referral, yeah, either way, fax or through the website. The website's quick and easy. So,
sure, absolutely.
all right,
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, and thank you so much, and I hope you have such a great Friday.
thanks. You too. You're welcome.
yeah, thank you.
All right, bye.